Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a conflict that, frankly, seemed to erupt overnight. We're talking about the 2026 war between the United States, Israel, and Iran, a clash that completely redrew the map of the Middle East in just a handful of days. So, let's get right into how it all went down.
Picture the scene. It's the morning of February 28th, 2026. People in Tehran are waking up not to their alarms, but to the sound of explosions overhead. This wasn't some minor skirmish or a stray missile. No, this was the opening salvo of a full-blown war.
And there was no ambiguity about it. President Trump himself announced it to the world, calling it a massive and ongoing campaign against Iran. The joint US-Israeli operation had a code name too, Operation Epic Fury. And its goal, he said, was to get rid of the threats posed by the Iranian regime once and for all. Now, this is where the story takes a stunning turn. The very first wave of attacks wasn't just about hitting military bases, it struck right at the heart of the regime, killing Iran's supreme leader. Just like that, the leadership was decapitated, and the stakes of this conflict were raised to a level nobody saw coming. But a war like this doesn't just happen out of the blue. You can't understand what happened in February 2026 without looking back at the 6 years leading up to it. There was a long, slow burn of hostility. So let's trace that path, because it leads directly to this moment. As you can see, this was a long time coming. You can almost draw a straight line from the killing of General Soleimani back in 2020. That was a major flashpoint. Fast forward to 2025, you have US strikes on nuclear sites, then the FBI is constantly warning that Iran is plotting revenge, and the final domino to fall, diplomacy completely collapsed in Geneva just days before the first bombs dropped. And we really need to pause on that 2020 Soleimani strike, because it's so critical. The US framed it as a necessary act of self-defense to stop future attacks. But the UN, along with many others, saw it very differently, as a violation of international law. This basic disagreement, this clash of perspectives, really defined the tense relationship for the next 6 years. Okay, so let's jump back to February 2026. As Operation Epic Fury was unfolding, the US and Israel were pretty clear about what they were trying to achieve. They laid out some very specific military goals. And listen, this went way beyond just the nuclear program. This was a 4-point checklist for dismantling Iran's entire military power structure. They wanted to wipe out the Navy, destroy the missile program, kill the nuclear ambitions, and cripple their network of proxy groups like Hezbollah. This was about taking Iran off the board as a regional power. So how'd they do it? Well, the first wave was a pretty terrifying display of modern weaponry. You had Tomahawk missiles hitting leadership compounds, stealth F-35s taking out hardened nuclear and missile sites, and then swarms of those single-use kamikaze-style drones hitting naval bases. It was a swift, coordinated, and absolutely devastating blow. But if the US and Israel thought Iran would just roll over, they were dead wrong. Iran's response was not only immediate, it was ferocious and incredibly widespread. It turned a targeted campaign into a regional firestorm almost overnight. Just look at the geographic spread of this retaliation. It was everywhere. They weren't just hitting back at military targets in Israel. They hit US bases all across the Gulf. And then they went for civilian targets, airports, hotels, and critical energy sites in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The message was clear. If we're in pain, everyone in the region is going to feel it. And amid all this chaos and violence came a truly horrific piece of news. Reports emerged of a strike on an elementary school in southern Iran. The number of dead was 175. Most of them were children. And when you look at the initial numbers, you start to see the immediate, tragic toll of this war. Within just a few days, 4 US service members were killed. 11 Israeli civilians lost their lives in the retaliation. And inside Iran, reports were already counting over 500 casualties. The human cost was real, and it was climbing fast. We're moving through these events really quickly, I know. If this breakdown is helping you make sense of this incredibly complex situation, do us a quick favor and hit that subscribe and like button. It really helps us keep bringing you these deep dives on major world events. Okay, so we've seen the first punch and the massive counterpunch, but this fire was just getting started. It was about to spread way beyond the initial combatants, pulling the entire region into its vortex and disrupting everything. And then came the move that sent a chill down the spine of the global economy. Iran's Revolutionary Guard announced that the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical oil shipping lanes on the planet,
was now closed. Any ship that tried to pass would be fired upon. They were effectively holding a huge chunk of the world's energy supply hostage.
And the human fallout just kept expanding. We're not just talking about direct casualties anymore. The United Nations released a staggering number. At least 230,000 people had already been displaced by the fighting across the Middle East. A refugee crisis was beginning.
And this is where things just get chaotic. The situation was spiraling so fast it became dangerously unpredictable. First, NATO has to get involved, shooting down a missile headed for Turkey. Then, the Gulf states are actively intercepting Iranian drones. And then, in the fog of war, you get a friendly fire incident where Kuwaiti defenses accidentally shoot down American jets. It was pure chaos.
So, you've got this firestorm raging in the Middle East. What does that mean for the rest of us? Well, the shockwaves hit the entire globe almost instantly, both economically and diplomatically. You can see the damage right here. It was an immediate economic gut punch. Oil prices shot up. European gas prices went through the roof, surging 40%. Trade in that vital strait was at a standstill. And the direct cost of the war itself, already over $5 billion in less than a week. And how did the world react? Well, it was complicated. There was no united front. The UN condemned it, of course. Back home, the US Congress was bitterly divided, with many Democrats calling the war illegal. And even America's closest allies in Europe were split. You had France and the UK sending warships, while Spain flat out denied the US the use of its bases for the conflict. So let's just recap. In a span of a single week, this war created a profoundly dangerous new reality. You've a completely destabilized Middle East, global energy markets that are going haywire, and a massive power vacuum in Iran with no clear successor. And that leaves us with the one giant unanswered question. The operation was called Epic Fury. But with this much chaos unleashed, with no clear endgame in sight, the whole world is left wondering, what comes after the Fury?
Thanks for sticking with us through this deep dive. Our goal is always to cut through the noise and give you the clearest picture we can. We'll be back soon to break down the next big story shaping our world. Thanks for watching.